In 1894, a stab wound killed the President of France, not because it hit his heart, but one torn blood vessel. Surgeons could stop bleeding by tying a vessel shut. Nobody on earth knew how to sew one back together. For most of history, a damaged artery meant amputation or death. Blood vessels were too fragile and too vital to repair. Surgeons had one trick: pinch the torn ends and tie them off with thread, sealing the vessel closed forever. That worked for a finger. It failed completely for a major vessel feeding the leg, the gut, or the brain. Cut off the blood supply to an organ, and the tissue beyond it dies within hours. So for centuries the rule was brutally simple: lose the limb, lose the organ, or lose the patient. Doctors had gotten remarkably good at removing damaged body parts. Rebuilding one was a different problem entirely. A blood vessel is a soft, slippery tube under constant pressure. Sew it wrong and it leaks, clots, or bursts. Ordinary needles were too thick and stitches too rough. The smallest snag could trigger a fatal blood clot. By the 1890s, repairing a torn vessel was considered one of surgery's last impossible problems. Then, in the summer of 1894, that impossible problem became a matter of life and death for a head of state. On June 23, 1894, French President Sadi Carnot was leaving a banquet in Lyon, France. As he stepped toward his carriage, a young anarchist named Sadi Carrel lunged from the crowd with a dagger. The blade tore into Carnot's abdomen, slicing through a major blood vessel deep inside him. Surgeons rushed to operate. They found the wound and knew exactly what had been torn. But they could only do what every surgeon of that era could do: tie the vessel shut and hope. Cutting off blood flow to stop the bleeding was itself going to kill him. Hours after the attack, the President of France died, not from the stab wound alone, but from surgery's limits. The killing made headlines across the world, but one detail haunted a young surgeon in Lyon named Alexis Carrel. Carrel was 21 years old, still training, and could not stop replaying the president's death in his mind. If someone had simply known how to sew that vessel back together, he realized, the president would have lived. Carrel decided he would solve the problem himself. His plan surprised everyone who knew him. He did not go to another surgeon for help. He went to the women in his mother's embroidery circle. Embroiderers spent years mastering tiny, even stitches on delicate fabric, exactly the control a damaged blood vessel demanded. Carrel spent months practicing needlework, training his hands to place stitches finer than any surgeon used at the time. He swapped coarse surgical needles for the slim, polished needles embroiderers used on silk. He also learned to handle vessel walls so gently that the tissue itself would not trigger a blood clot. But a new problem emerged immediately. A blood vessel is a round tube, not a flat seam. Sew a circular opening shut edge to edge, and you inevitably pinch it, narrowing or blocking the very vessel you're repairing. Carrel needed a way to close a circle without squeezing it into a slit. The embroidery skills had gotten him this far. Solving the geometry would take something new. Carrel's solution is still taught to surgery residents today. He called it triangulation. Instead of sewing straight around the circular opening, he placed 3 stitches at equal points around the rim. Those 3 points pulled the round opening into the shape of a triangle. A triangle, unlike a circle, has straight edges, and straight edges are easy to sew shut evenly. He simply closed each of the 3 straight sides with a row of tiny, even stitches. The result was a seam that held under blood pressure without narrowing the vessel at all. It took extraordinary patience. A single successful repair could take hours of steady, magnified needlework. But it worked. Carrel could reconnect a severed artery, and blood would flow through it normally again. In animal experiments, the vessels he repaired stayed open and functional for months afterward. The surgery doctors called impossible in 1894 now had a solution, and Carrel wasn't finished with it yet. In 1904, Carrel left France for the United States, chasing better-funded laboratories for his research. He worked first at the University of Chicago, then at the Rockefeller Institute in New York City. If you could reconnect a blood vessel, Carrel realized, you could reconnect an entire organ's blood supply. He began transplanting kidneys between animals, stitching their vessels together with his triangulation technique. The organs survived the surgery. The blood vessel problem had been the missing piece of transplant surgery all along. Carrel later teamed up with aviator Charles Lindbergh to build a pump that could keep organs alive outside the body. That pump was an early ancestor of the heart-lung machines used in open-heart surgery today. In 1912, Carrel won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for work that began with a president's death and a box of embroidery needles. Here is the uncomfortable part of the story most textbooks leave out. In the decades after his Nobel Prize, Carrel became a prominent public supporter of eugenics. During the Second World War, he held an official post under France's collaborationist Vichy government. After France was liberated in 1944, he was accused of collaboration. He died before ever facing trial, at the age of 71. His scientific breakthrough and his political record are 2 separate facts of the same life, and both are true. Every heart bypass, kidney transplant, and dialysis surgery performed today still relies on a version of Carrel's triangulation stitch. A technique born from a president's fatal stab wound and a circle of embroiders now runs through millions of operations a year. The line between an untreatable wound and a routine surgery, it turns out, was 3 carefully placed stitches. Next time, the doctor who measured blood pressure for the first time, using a horse, a tube, and sheer nerve,